Continuing right on with Obamacare, or as you said, Obamacare, we're privileged tonight to have Mike Henry here from Philadelphia. He made the trip, and we appreciate you extending your day to include our meeting, because I know you have other meetings today. He was regional Philadelphia regional coordinator for Heritage Action. He now works with American Majority in the South.
Nope. Still Heritage Action.
Still Heritage Action, and he will be talking to us in regard to the latest information about what's happening with Obamacare. Thank you, President.
Thank you. You guys are all familiar with Tom Smith, right? Just ran for Senate.
Yes.
Last Saturday, I drove up to his house. It's right above Pittsburgh. It was about 5.5 hours, just because I hit some traffic. 5.5 hours out there to speak for 10 minutes, 5 hours back. And as I'm sure you're thinking, I kind of thought to myself on my way out there, why the heck am I doing this? And for me, it was easy. Next November, I'm getting married, and I go out and I fight because we're going to start a family in a couple years. And specifically with Obamacare, we're going to go out and we're going to be shopping for health care in the next year. And the choices that are going to be on the table aren't even close to the choices that we had maybe 5 years ago. So for me, it was easy, but I thought about this and I challenged the people at Tom Smith's house to really search within themselves and think about why they were there. It was great that they came out to a Tea Party meeting and that they're out there and they're listening, but it's not enough. You have to think really deep down, why are you coming out here? Is it your significant other? Is it yourself? Is it your grandchildren? Is it your children? Why do you do what you do? Why do you feel so passionately? And for some it's easy, for some it's not. But you really have to think, why should I keep pushing on? This Obamacare fight is not an easy fight. It was never an easy fight. It's not going to be an easy fight for the politicians. That's why they don't like it. But we're kind of in this really difficult stage. The House has passed a continuing resolution. And if anyone is unfamiliar with how this all works, you can defund programs through the appropriations bill, which is the budget. It's called the continuing resolution. That's what the House just passed. You can also defund mandatory spending, which is a lot of the excuses that we've heard from these guys that said you can't defund mandatory spending, but you can. They have done it historically. Washington has a nickname for it. It's called CHIMPS. It's called Changes in Mandatory Spending. And every year since 1976, just to give you an example, the Hyde Amendment for any pro-lifers around here has been introduced into Congress, and that defunds any mandatory spending on federal spending on abortion. So when you hear that we can't do it now, it's total bunk, because they've done it before. Or every single year since 1976, they've tried to. So just to give you a little bit of a catch-up, if any of you don't know, the House passed this CR after months, really, of people saying that we could never do it. They were wrong, because the conservatives all throughout this country, we went on a 9-city tour. I'm sure some of you heard about it, with Senator Jim DeMint and Rafael Cruz. We averaged about 600 to 700 people per stop. We had 2,500 people down in Dallas, where Ted Cruz also spoke. Those voices of those people that were there and everyone else that has joined in have come up and they've demanded that we defund Obamacare, this partisan bill that was barely squeaked through in this 2-year period where the Democrats held a supermajority. They didn't think we could do it, we did it. And now it's in the Senate's hands. It's really imperative that you, over the next week, demand that Senator Toomey gets on board. He has said that he is on board with the defunding effort, but he left it open to a floor debate. And if there's a cloture vote coming up, as some of you may know. If you vote for this cloture, it means that you're voting for it to be put out onto the floor, and Harry Reid and the Democrats can strip out the defunding legislation or the defunding language from this continuing resolution. So really, a vote for cloture is a vote to fund Obamacare. That's where you really see whether or not they're for or against defunding. So we need people calling Senator Toomey's office, just like they've been calling, I'm sure, Tom Marino's office over weeks and weeks and weeks, and saying, we know what's going to happen if you guys allow this for debate on the floor. If it does go out onto debate on the floor, it will get sent right back to the House. That's where the fight will be. It's like a tennis match, back and forth, back and forth. And it's really, really important that we also let Tom Marino know that if it comes back to the House, he's been solid so far on this. He signed the Tim Meadows letter, the Mark Meadows letter that was out there, if anybody had been following it, saying that he supports defunding Obamacare. So he's kind of been on board since the beginning. You have to let him know that when it comes back, if and when it comes back from the Senate, he needs to stand tall and say, I'm sorry, we already sent a CR to you guys. We're not going to change our minds. We're not going to back down. We're not going to blink. And if the House sends it back to the Senate, then the president has a really hard choice. I mean, he has to shut down the government or he has to sign the CR. It's not the Republicans shutting down the government. It's the president, in order to enact his failed law, which barely passed a supermajority in the Congress. He has to decide whether or not to force it on the American people. Personally, I thought about the implications of Obamacare and really why I fight. I also started thinking about, for this other group that I made a presentation for, I'm Catholic. I don't know if anybody else is Catholic. But around Philadelphia, there's a incredible Catholic health system. Mercy Health System has about 91 facilities in all around Philadelphia. And the biggest thing, besides the HHS mandate, is the tax-exempt status for a lot of these hospitals. They are tax-exempt, which means they can help these uninsured people that come into their hospitals. And I've given tons of personal donations to them because they help their communities. Now, under Obamacare, the tax-exempt status is going to be hard to maintain. And so if they lose their tax-exempt status, they'll have to become for-profit, which means they won't keep taking these uninsured people that they've been helping for years and years and years and years. And in some cases, they'll close down. So those 91 facilities may start dwindling pretty fast once this act is fully implemented on January 1st. We have about 7 days left. 7 days left before enrollment starts. And really until January 1st, when the sugar kicks in, after January 1st, we're really not going to have a chance to reform this. Once all the subsidies kick in, no major entitlement reform has happened once all the subsidies kick in. So it's really important between now and next week that you don't just call Toomey's office and let him know we're watching you on the cloture vote and anything else. We're also watching Representative Marino on how he'll stand tall to the commitment that he's already made to defunding Obamacare. Does anyone have any questions? I know the procedure it's a little complicated. So, ma'am?
Yeah, I called Toomey's office today to ask him about where he stood on the cloture vote, but the girl on the end of the line, she wouldn't address it.
Mm-hmm.
She kept saying, well, he's going to vote for the continuing resolution. I said, well, what about the cloture vote? And she just kind of ignored me like I didn't know what I was talking about. So she completely did not address it and just kept continuing to say, he will vote for the continuing resolution. And that was the only answer I got.
A lot of people are mad. I should rephrase that. A lot of politicians are mad that we're making this an issue because they stand to either gain or lose some political capital when it comes to the elections in 2014. we're sending a message that we're not just political capital, we're people that are going to be affected by this law. And as soon as the American people had the chance, they voted out that Congress that voted on Obamacare. In 2010, it was an unbelievable wave of support for the people that were railing against Obamacare. And this is really the first time that they can actually do it. They could have done it with any continuing resolution, but they chose to do the gimmicky votes 41 other times. Now this has real world implications. We're not ducking our heads and saying that this doesn't. We're just asking them to stand on principle and stop worrying about their election numbers and start worrying about their constituents.
Could you give us some figures as what is in the bill, some examples of what is in the bill that would impact us on a lower level, going forward? How much money?
Well, just personally, I can tell you what we're seeing is a lot of younger people's premiums going up. And you would think if the healthiest pool's premiums are going up, that older people's premiums would be going down, but we're not seeing that either. So what we're really seeing is across the board, all the premiums going up. And while there is affordable plans being offered to lower income people, the choices are very narrow in terms of hospitals and doctors. And what we've been preaching is a free market system. If you opened up to more competition, you'd have those same affordable plans, but you'd have way more to choose from. And a lot of people go back to the well of, well, I can keep my kids on until I'm 26. And Jim DeMint made the good point that if you open it up to competition, you'd have plans that you could keep your kid on until he's 45. So I spoke to a woman, she has a daughter that's going, I believe it's Trinity University, and they just got a letter from the administration there that her student health care plan is being raised by 110%. So that's just at the university level. And she was on Fox and Friends talking about it, and she called the university afterwards because she didn't get permission to go on and talk about it. And the administrator said, no, that's fine. We're not happy about it. We love that someone's going out there and vouching for us. So none of these employers, none of these schools, none of these places that offer these benefits are happy because they're seeing these premiums skyrocket. And then they have to go out and they have to tell their employees or the parents of these students that you have to give us more money. Go ahead.
If somebody doesn't have health care at all, just chooses not to have it.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you're 6, whether you're 21 or 15 or 91, what's the penalty?
I'm unsure on that. I'll have to. I can get the figures.
Everybody thinks you're getting something for free here.
Oh yeah, no. There's a penalty if you don't enroll into a
$100 a day, I heard.
Yeah.
That kind of touches on my question, but I'm going to go a little further. Say, that was going to be part of my question. Say you go to the hospital and you don't have health insurance. Because you're talking about hospitals not taking people because they can't afford it anymore because there's that liability thing, or they don't. What happens? Can they refuse them?
I'll give you a good example. And this person was insured, but it gives you a sense of how they look at the patients now. My best friend's dad is a doctor. He's been a doctor for a very long time. He's coming close to retirement, and as you can guess, he's thinking about taking that retirement. He got into an argument with a young doctor down in Philadelphia. And this woman, she had an ailment. It was treatable. Normally they would treat her and she'd be fine. Without the treatment, she probably would deteriorate pretty quickly, but she wasn't deteriorating now. She could easily get this treatment. And he found out from this young doctor that they sent her to hospice, basically to go die. And he said, why would you do that? This woman's fine. She could have been treated. And they said it didn't make sense. We sent her to hospice. And so they're looking now at people as a business transaction, whether or not it makes sense business-wise to treat you. or not.
Do they realize that they're doing this, that this will happen?
It's the new
Because
healthcare
they're
laws.
saying that this is going to help people.
The new
How is this
Yeah.
helping people?
The new healthcare laws are forcing these hospitals to look, in order to survive, look at their patients as if they have some monetary value.
Well, that's what's gonna happen.
Mm-hmm.
Because if these younger kids don't get insurance because they can't afford it,
Yeah.
they're not going to also get health care.
And to think, just going on to the youth movement with this, it's so out of touch with youth culture to think that young people are going to love having 2 or 3 choices when it comes to healthcare. Our CEO gave the example of when he was a kid, he used to have to go out and buy the whole CD to get that one song. Now his little brother goes on to iTunes and he goes, track 4 stinks. I'm going to buy just track 6. He loves having choices. He goes onto these hotel websites and he looks at the best deals and who gives him the best packages and which one gives him a cookie at the check-in desk. So to think that these young people are going to love Obamacare is so off base.
That brings up my next question. Why do our senators believe that they're going to lose political capital by opposing Obamacare?
It's a really, really good
Because
question.
Even my friends that are Democrats that voted the wrong way, they're now on Facebook saying, "Hey, we hate Obamacare."
Yeah.
And it's
We saw it with these House members. Ultimately, what it is 100 guys worrying about being the one guy that loses a seat. And when you bring up 95, now 95, so they lost seats in 95, but they kept the majority, and that was with a House that was far less safe than this House in terms of the way that they've districted things. And in 96, you have to remember, you had one of the most popular Democratic presidents at the top of the ticket, and they still retained the House majority. So ultimately, you have a whole bunch of guys worrying about being the one seat, because when we did our polling, it was 77% wanted Obamacare either defunded or slowed down. And that's within 10 competitive districts. So 1,000 people in 10 competitive districts. And it corresponds with this latest poll from CNN, which is a much broader scale. 67% of people are worried about their health care costs under Obamacare. So it's the selfishness of these guys that are worried about potentially losing one seat, and if they're going to be that seat.
Well, they will lose it if it passes.
But the good thing is Tom Marino in this district, now granted it's a very, very safe district, he's been on board ever since the beginning. He was one of the first people to sign on to the Meadows letters. And he, of course, did vote. But we still have to monitor and see if this comes back to the House. He has to stand by his rhetoric. He has to stand by what he said from the beginning. No.
Mike, do you know what the number is that people like yourself are using of the uninsured people in our country at this time? The reason I ask the question, I grew up in the inner city of Detroit, and all of the indigent people in that community, and there were a lot, came to the emergency room always for health care because they never owned health care, not in their lives. So now they're 50, 60 years old. They're going to get health care under this, and we're all going to pay for it.
I believe I think it's 30 million are
30
uninsured.
million? Okay, that sounds about
I
right.
believe
Yes,
so.
okay, thank you.
Sir?
Yeah, today Senator McConnell announced that he's going to support cloture, and Lamar Alexander joined him. So those two are going to be for cloture. My question, Mike, is it effective to call a McConnell, because we're not constituents of this? Does that make any difference if we flooded McConnell's phones?
It made a difference with Boehner. His office certainly felt the heat. And I don't know if it's quite the same situation, because Boehner was thinking about whether or not to implement this entire process. He really held the keys to making this an issue. And I think he and Cantor's office got so swamped and really all representatives, all Republican representatives' offices were so swamped that they decided we need to do this or nobody's going to vote for us in the primary come election cycle. So I wouldn't discourage it, but it's much more effective with Toomey's office. Now Toomey, up until a week ago, wasn't behind the defund effort. I believe his exact words were, "I don't see what my voice adds to the movement." What it contributes.
I think his emails,
Yeah.
that's what he said at first, but now he's changed his tune, but he's not, he doesn't seem fully committed.
And the reason that this whole process was implemented, it was because people just about melted down the switchboard in Washington. Sorry.
I've never been one to support a third party. I've always wanted to see the Republican Party get its act together. But however, if these Republicans don't stand up and start fighting and carrying what they say when they run, then it's time for all of us to start voting them and say, look, you want to stay in power, you better think about this because I'm leaning toward the third party. I'm getting fed up of being ripped off and lied to.
And I think that's what they ultimately
We
realized.
fight. We go out and we fight for these guys. We put our dignity on the line. We put our character on the line. We say this is a guy that's going to fight for us, and then they turn their back on us.
Yeah.
And that's enough.
And it's pretty incredible. I mean, this week what are they doing? They passed the CR, and now they spend their time attacking Senator Cruz, who's standing up on principle and saying,
Pathetic.
I could care less. What if I get reelected? That's great. If not, so what? I stood on principle this one time.
And the last time they stood on principle, it benefited them. The last time they shut down the government. Do they not check their own history? So that's a way for us to threaten these guys, and we talk to them on the phone and say, you either fight for us or we're going third party.
They need refreshing. And Mark Levin made a great point. As soon as the American people could vote out that Congress, after they passed Obamacare, they did, and it overwhelmingly threw them out.
Mike, I've been in the insurance business a long time. When Hillary wanted her little pet project,
Hillary Care.
I did a white paper, and I believe it was 3 or 4 countries I brought into play that all had national health insurance, and every single one of them had abysmal results, but they don't show the abysmal results because they do things like, even in England today, they continue people on drugs just to keep them steady. And what they do, as a matter of fact, that's one of Senator Toomey's functions. When he was running for office, I met a woman there who said one doctor saved her husband's life because they know all about your care. Obamacare will know every iota of every dime spent on you. And they came to her husband who was dying and needed a heart transplant and said, we're sorry, over the last 2 years, we've spent too much on you.
Yes.
And therefore, we are not going to authorize this. One doctor had compassion, saved his life. If you don't believe that there's death squads in this, part of my white paper cited the Netherlands. The Netherlands, years ago, with national health insurance, had voluntary euthanasia, aka Dr. Corky. I'd like to go, it's my time, I want to get out of here. That migrated first ubiquitously under the tables, and then overtly with a law that passed and said involuntary euthanasia is now the law.
Yes.
Involuntary euthanasia, you need 2 family members and a doctor to sign off that you're no longer viable, or you're costing too much, or you're a burden. Goodbye, lights out. Now, I find it very ironic, and I'm very ignorant about the legal matters, but I found it very discouraging that nobody brought up to have a Supreme Court challenge that we've got a law that everyone needs to be in, but there's every single exception in the book, including the legislators who exempted themselves out of this plan, this fantastic plan that is ice cream and butter all at once. It goes down smoothly. How can we possibly expect them to be objective or fight for us when they exempt themselves out of what affects them? Because they won't have the death squads visit them. They're above that.
really what changes hearts is fear, and it's what happened in the House. A month ago, people would have never even given this continuing resolution to pass the House a chance. It wouldn't have even been brought to the floor, let alone Boehner and Cantor championing it. So it's all about pressure and influence. And if you hold your elected officials accountable, and we saw it with the Toomey Manchin Amendment, when our activists got really active on that, and we're seeing it with us, the Tea Party Patriots and Freedom Works, that they've got people mobilized in a way that I've never seen, at least not since the Tea Party has come into existence. This has been the one issue where people are just, it's a steady drumbeat. Over the last month, it's just been over and over and over again, please defund it, please defund it. And these senators, I'm sure they're in the midst of it right now. I don't think they knew what was going to come once the House passed this CR. Our activists are calling them every day, multiple times a day, and demanding this.
Mike, speaking of pressure, Ted Cruz very strongly supported a don'tfundit.com initiative. In a week's time, they got 1 million signatures. He's now come out and asked for a second million. Is there enough time to do that? He said, get 5 of your friends, please. We need that other million.
Well, we'll see. He is, it looks more and more like he's going to filibuster the cloture vote in the House and ask that it, and of course, he'll need everyone's support during that time, but it'll bring a lot more awareness.
What will that do?
It will force it into the spotlight and hopefully allow people time and give it enough exposure that people are calling their senator's office and demanding that they get on board. But it also shines a really bright light on those House Republicans that passed this and said, and it says to them, this man's standing on principle, help him out and stand by what you said. If this comes back to you, you better support him. And we need people to support any politician that will stand up and fight for principle.
Does Mr. Cruz have a website that we can get onto that anyone knows? Freedom Works.
Well, don'tfundit.com is you can sign a petition there, and then they also link to our
I
talking
think that
points.
gentleman also brings up a very good point. If we email Toomey's office and ask him to put himself in our shoes, as if he had to get this health care himself, to please look at it from our point of view.
It's what I've been saying is remind these guys that we're not political capital. We're not to be traded around just because you're worried about your election numbers. And if that's your only argument is we might lose this great capital that we'll get from Obamacare failing, remind them that it's affecting real life people. And it's going to affect me. It's going to affect, I'm sure, certainly someone that you know. We're already seeing people's benefits being taken away, people's hours being cut, and it hasn't even hit yet. So I'll just finish up on...
May I have a question?
Sure.
Maybe I'll ask you afterwards. No, that's all.
Yeah, I'll just finish up. We, really in the last month, we're about a 4-year-old program. We're the political arm of the Heritage Foundation, as a lot of you know. And we've grown, certainly in those 4 years, but in the last month we've grown so much more. We've been at the forefront of this battle. Our activists have been unbelievable, working tirelessly, demanding that the House do this. They got this small victory, but they're sobered. They know that this is just kind of the first baby step in this process, and that we need to hold strong. If you're interested in becoming an activist with us, we don't try to control messages. We like to educate people about what federal legislation is on the table of their congressman. If they choose to act, that's great. We'll help them out in any way possible. If you want my legislative updates, just sign the card in the back, and of course I'll be able to answer anybody else's questions in the back. Thank you very much for having me up here.